The history of Mecca. Did Mecca exist during Abraham's time? This is Daniel Amari from the Religion Research Institute. This episode is based on Dr. Rafat Amari's book, Islam in Light of History. In the last 3 episodes, episode 1 and 2 and 3, we discussed the historical and geographical data from the 4th century BC to the 4th century AD. And this data is geographical data that discussed all the data of Arabia, in particular Western Arabia, that include the area where Mecca was eventually built, yet it did not mention Mecca. This is very significant. Why? Because the Islamic claims state that Mecca was in existence from 2000 BC all the way to the 7th century, and it existed, the city of Mecca, as the most significant center of Arabia, center of trade and center of religion. Yet, when we look at all of our geographical data and all the historical data from the 4th century BC to the 4th century AD, we find no mention of Mecca, no mention of the temple of Kaaba. In fact, other temples were mentioned, but none of them were mentioned in the region of Mecca. Now we'll focus on the archaeological data for Arabia, when every other city and nation around Mecca have extensive archaeology. Mecca was built on the famous commercial route between southern and northern Arabia. Various attested cities, such as Dedan and Tayma, have archaeological inscriptions attesting to their history as far as the 8th century BC. Despite the fact that Mecca was between civilizations such as Sabaeans and northern Arabia, they do not have any known inscriptions that mention Mecca, as if Mecca did not exist. Mecca is known for very low amounts of rain compared to some other regions of Arabia. Yet despite of that, there are no archaeological inscriptions attesting to the existence of Mecca before Christ. This is not a mere argument from silence. For if one examines the rich archaeology in Arabia for cities and nations south, north, or east of Mecca, you will find rich archaeology for them. Yet there is no archaeology for Mecca before the 4th century AD at best. The problem is that according to the Islamic claim, Mecca should have been in continual existence since the days of Abraham and Ishmael 2000 BC, as the most significant city of Arabia, the center of monotheism and trade in Arabia, yet no archaeology. The archaeological inscriptions found for the other cities of Arabia and the other nations of Arabia include series of rulers and kings for every Arabian kingdom. Tables have been drawn listing rulers and kingdoms that they controlled. So, for example, when we look at northern Arabia, we look at Qidar and Tayma and Dedan. Some of these inscriptions are attested by Assyrians, Babylonians, Maenians, and biblical records. Records go as far as the 9th century BC, all the way to the 5th century BC. All of these records give a series of 14 kings and queens who ruled northern Arabia. Few short gaps exist, otherwise the series is complete. We get information about their gods, with title of Rahim, for example, which is believed to be the Lama, Ar-Rahim. Now, one thing that is very important about all of this is you see the kind of quality of data we're getting. A series of kings, almost uninterrupted, and data as old as the 8th and the 9th century BC for northern Arabians. Yet, we don't find anything for Mecca. Now we mention Thamud and Lahyan in northern Arabia. For Thamud, we find inscriptions showing their life, their wars, their deities from the 8th century BC to the 5th century AD. 8th century BC to the 5th century AD. In contrast, Mecca, which supposedly existed according to the Islamic claims from 2000 BC to the 7th century AD, a longer range, has no archaeology for that time. Lihyan, or the Lihyanites, except for the founder, we have complete record of the rulers, historical records, and their gods, from the 4th century BC to the 2nd century BC. Notice only maybe about 200, 300 years between the 4th century BC to the 2nd century BC. And despite the fact that it's a short period of time for the Lihyanites, we have archaeological data and we have almost complete records of their rulers and their gods. Yet for Mecca, we have no archaeology. We continue to the northern Arabians of the Nabateans. They control, the Nabateans, the trade route between the south and northern Arabia that passes through the same region where Mecca was later built in the 4th century AD. Nabateans' records are complete both internally and externally. Internally as the Nabatean inscriptions and records, and externally as external records talking about the Nabateans. And the records attest to rulers of Nabateans from the 2nd century BC till the 2nd century after Christ. So maybe about 400, 500 years. Yet, despite that very short period compared to Mecca, which is supposed to be 2,400 years or 2,500 years, we find complete record both internally and externally for the Nabateans. We find nothing for Mecca. Now, if we compare all of this data to Mecca, Islamic traditions say that Mecca was in existence before the 21st century BC until the 4th century AD, when it was actually built. Yet no records for Mecca, neither externally nor internally. In a very dry region, I mean Mecca is in a very dry region, where records persist. The history of Arabia is abundantly expressed by its records. It is impossible to introduce a city like Mecca into history so well documented. Now we leave northern Arabia and we come and we focus on southern Arabia. We're going to focus on Ma'in, and other small kingdom. Ma'in, a line of rulers from the 4th century BC to the 1st century BC. 26 rulers. And this is very significant. So you get, a long list of rulers, but not just that. Around Ma'in, we have records in southern of Arabia for smaller kingdoms with little influence compared to the other kingdoms. Kingdom of Haram, records from 7th century BC to 2nd century BC. Kingdom of Inaba, most prominent ruler is King Waqahil Yafush. Kingdom of Kaminahu, records from the 6th century BC to the 2nd century BC. And Kingdom of Nashan, records from 8th century BC to the 5th century BC. And despite the fact that we have records for all of these in southern Arabia's very small kingdom, yet we have nothing for Mecca. We continue with the southern Arabians, and we look at the kingdom of Qataban. We have a line of rulers from the 4th century BC to the 2nd century AD, 31 rulers. And the reason we're focusing on all of this data and all this information is for the very simple reason to show basically that this is not an argument from silence. All of these kingdoms, whether are very small, very insignificant, that existed for maybe a couple of hundred years or a little bit more, whether they existed a long time ago or relatively more recent, we have records for them, and we have a list of rulers and list of names. Yet we have nothing for Mecca, the most significant city. This is Daniel Amari from the Religion Research Institute.